Lenin and Stalin on the State Form of Dictatorship of the Proletariat by D. I. Chesnikov. The question of the dictatorship of the proletariat occupies a central place in Marxist-Leninist theory. Marx and Engels in their time profoundly elaborated this question on the basis of an analysis of the laws of development of capitalism and on the basis of a generalization 0f the experience of the international working class movement in the epoch of pre-monopoly capitalism. The greatest merit of Marx and Engels consists in that they brought to light the world historical role of the working class, created the theory of proletarian and proved the necessity of smashing the apparatus of the bourgeois state and establishing the dictatorship of the proletariat. The brilliant conclusions of Marx and Engels were, however, forgotten and corrupted by the opportunists and by the confirmed lackeys of the bourgeoisie. Till the October Socialist Revolution, the distortion one Marxist teachings on the state proceeded, above all, along two lines. On the one hand, many bourgeois sociologists and socialists of the type of Scheidemann, Van der Velde, MacDonald, L. Blum, and company, being compelled under pressure of historical facts to admit that the state exists where class contradictions exist, corrected Marx by substituting for the Marxist postulate of the bourgeois state as an instrument of suppression of the oppressed classes by the exploiting classes, the postulate of the reconciliation of classes by the state. During the First World War and particularly after the February Revolution, when the question of the relationship of the proletarian revolution to the bourgeois state came sharply to the fore, as a question for immediate action and as one embracing all the masses, all the Russian Mensheviks and socialist revolutionaries veered round to the standpoint of the petty bourgeois theory of reconciliation of classes by the state. On the other hand, the centrists of the Second International, and to begin with their leader, K. Kautsky, while not denying the fact that the state is an organ of class domination, concealed and repudiated Marx's conclusion of the necessity of destroying and smashing the state power of the bourgeoisie. In his celebrated work, State and Revolution, Lenin subjected these viewpoints to withering criticism and completely annihilated them. Lenin's greatest service consists above all in that he restored Marx's real views on the state, which had been confused and corrupted by the opportunists, and revealed full profundity of Marx's teachings on the state as an apparatus of coercion of one class by another. Lenin restored and developed still further the Marxist teaching on the smashing of the old, exploiting apparatus of state power, and explained how this smashing should be carried out in practice. Lenin pointed out that the smashing of the bourgeois state is inconceivable without a series of actions, breaking up the economic power of the landlords and the capitalists, the liquidation of the bureaucratic and corrupt caste of officials, and the promotion of the conscious representatives of the working class, the peasantry and the working intelligentsia to state posts, an end to the old police and its substitution by a militia, the liquidation of the old bourgeois court and prosecuting magistracy and their substitution by revolutionary tribunals, people's courts and revolutionary magistracy, the emancipation of the army from the influence of the bourgeois command and the substitution of the old army by a new one with new commanding staff, new principles of recruitment to it and political teaching, etc., etc. Lenin elaborated the theory of the dictatorship of the proletariat. As Comrade Stalin pointed out, the new that Lenin contributed to the teaching on the dictatorship of the proletariat consists in that he pointed to Soviet power as the state form of the dictatorship of the proletariat, disclosed in the formula of the dictatorship of the proletariat a special form of the class alliance of the proletariat and the peasantry, with the leading role of the proletariat in this alliance, elaborated the question of the dictatorship of the proletariat as the highest form of democracy in a class society, a proletarian democracy that reflects the interests of the majority, as opposed to bourgeois democracy which reflects the interests of the minority. Comrade Stalin defended the Leninist teachings on the alliance of the working class with the peasantry and the leading role of the working class in this alliance as the principle of the dictatorship of the proletariat. In developing Lenin's ideas, Comrade Stalin elaborated the question of the mechanism of the dictatorship of the proletariat, of the role of the Bolshevik Party, the main guiding, directing and leading force in the Soviet state, and of the transmission belts between the party and the masses, the trade unions, the Soviets, the cooperative societies, the YCLs. The Leninist teaching on the special features and the advantages of the socialist state were further developed in e-works of Comrade Stalin. Lenin and Stalin, the organizers of the first socialist state in the world, not only developed the Marxist teachings on the state in a creative manner but also embodied them in life. Under the leadership of Lenin and Stalin, the working class of Russia in alliance with the toiling peasantry overthrew the power of the exploiters and created a mighty, multinational socialist state, whose stability might well be the envy of any other state. The Soviet power, says Comrade Stalin, in the course of a short historical period has transformed our country into an invincible fortress. This victory of world historical significance can be explained by the fact that the Bolshevik party, guided by Leninist-Stalinist teachings on the socialist state, has persistently fought and fights for the all-round consolidation of the Soviet state. Under the leadership of J.V. Stalin, who was the comrade in arms of the great Lenin and who continues his cause, the Soviet socialist state has achieved successes of world historical importance. In the USSR, the exploiting classes were defeated and eliminated and socialism was built. On the basis of the victory of socialism, socialist democracy has been developed and flourished, and the Soviet state has been more firmly consolidated, as a genuinely democratic and the most powerful state of the present time. The socialist Soviet state was the principal instrument for the liquidation of the exploiting classes and the building of socialism under conditions of peaceful development. It was the main weapon by means of which the Bolshevik party and the Soviet people mobilized all the forces in the country and secured the defeat of Hitlerite Germany and imperialist Japan during the Second World War. At the present time, the Soviet socialist state is organizing communist construction within our country and is a bulwark of all anti-imperialist forces in the international arena, a bulwark of peace, democracy, freedom and the independence of the peoples. Comrade Stalin's championing of the Leninist teachings on the dictatorship of the proletariat and bis further creative elaboration of the theory of the socialist state plays a very important role in the development and the strengthening of the Soviet state. Comrade Stalin pointed out that the main thing in Marxism-Leninism is the question of the dictatorship of the proletariat, and he gave a brilliant definition of its three aspects: the utilization of the power of the proletariat for the suppression of the exploiters, for the defense of the country, for the consolidation of the ties with the proletarians of the other lands, and for the development and the victory of the revolution in all countries. The utilization of the power of the proletariat in order to detach the toiling and exploited masses once and for all from the bourgeoisie, to consolidate the alliance of the proletariat with these masses, to enlist these masses for the work of socialist construction, and to ensure the state leadership of these masses by the proletariat. The utilization of the power of the proletariat for the organization of socialism, for the abolition of classes, for the transition to a society without classes, to a society without a state. Comrade Stalin teaches only all these three aspects taken together give us a complete and finished concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat. After the profound analysis of the whole course of development traversed by the socialist state, Comrade Stalin set forth two phases of its development, the first phase lasting from the victory of the October Socialist Revolution up to the elimination of the exploiting classes, and the second phase, beginning after the elimination of the exploiters. In the first phase of its development, the socialist state had three functions: it crushed the resistance of the bourgeoisie, strengthened the defenses of the country against external aggression, and finally, it carried out the work of economic organization and cultural education. This third function, says Comrade Stalin, did not attain its complete development in the conditions of the first phase of the socialist state. In the second phase of development of the Soviet state, the function of military suppression inside the country ceased, died away, for exploitation and exploiters had been abolished. As for the army, punitive organs and intelligence service, their edge was no longer turned to the inside of the country but to the outside, against external enemies. In place of the function of suppression, the state acquired a new function, the function of protecting socialist property. The function of defending the country from foreign attack remained, and the function of economic organization and cultural education also remained and was developed to the full. Now the main task of the state inside the country is the work of peaceful economic organization and cultural education. In his report to the 18th Congress of the CPSU, Comrade Stalin said, "As you see, we now have an entirely new socialist state, without precedent in history and differing considerably in form and functions from the socialist state of the first phase." In developing the theory of the socialist state in particular, Comrade Stalin pays special attention to elaborating the problem of the relationship of the internal and external functions of the state, and in this connection, he gave a new formulation of the question of the state under communism. Comrade Stalin has laid down that the socialist state cannot die away unless the capitalist encirclement is liquidated. This new chapter, which Comrade Stalin has contributed to the theory of the socialist state, eliminates an important theoretical gap which existed in the Marxist teaching on the state. It at the same time develops this Marxist teaching by making it wonderfully complete, all-sided and harmonious. The party has always been guided by Comrade Stalin's directive that a strong and powerful dictatorship of the proletariat is necessary for the ultimate triumph of communism. In 1933, when the foundations of a socialist economy had already been laid, Comrade Stalin came out against the enemies of the people who were preaching the abolition of the Soviets in the field of all-out collectivization, and against those who sowed confusion by representing the question of the withering away of the state in an oversimplified manner. Some comrades interpreted the thesis on the abolition of classes, the establishment of classless society, and the withering away of the state to mean a justification of laziness and complacency, a justification of the counter-revolutionary theory that the class struggle is subsiding and that state power is to be relaxed. Needless to say, such people cannot have anything in common with our party. They are either degenerates, or double dealers, and must be driven out of the party. The abolition of classes cannot be achieved by the subsiding of the class struggle, but by its intensification. The state will die out not as a result of the relaxation of the state power, but as a result of its utmost consolidation, which is necessary for the purpose of finally crushing the remnants of the dying classes, and of organizing defense against the capitalist encirclement, which is far from having been done away with as yet and will not soon be done away with. The Soviet state fulfilled its principal and decisive role in the rebuilding of our country on socialist foundations, a rebuilding which proceeded in the course of a bitter struggle against capitalist and against petty bourgeois elements. The Soviet state has been and remains a guiding force in the development of socialist economy. The strengthening of the socialist state and of its economy ensured the unshaken stability of the rear of the USSR during the Great Patriotic War. By strengthening the socialist state and its organs, and particularly, the army and the intelligence service, the Soviet people were well armed to meet the perfidious attack of Hitlerite Germany on the Soviet Union, and achieved victory over her after liberating the people's Zero-F Europe from the scourge of fascist servitude. The socialist state emerged still more strengthened from the furnace of war. The war demonstrated that the Soviet social and state structure enjoys an inestimable advantage over the bourgeois social and state structure both in times of peace and of war. In his speech on the 26th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution, Comrade Stalin referred to the sources of the strength of the Soviet state. These sources of strength were the friendship of the peoples of our country, the organizing role of the party, its close ties with the people, the moral and political unity of the Soviet people which guaranteed the unshaken firmness of the Soviet state, and life-giving Soviet patriotism. The Soviet socialist state directs the development of the economy and culture of the Soviet Union in the interests of the people and draws in all the workers into fervent creative work. In its solicitude for the well-being of the people, it is directing the transformation of nature on a scale that was inconceivable before. The decree of the CC on CPSU and the Council of Ministers of the USSR on the plan for the planting of shelter belts, with the object of a struggle against drought, serves as a clear example of this. The Soviet state expresses its ceaseless solicitude for the development of science and culture in the country and for the communist education of the workers. The session of the V.I. Lenin All-Union Academy of Agricultural Sciences, where the anti-popular, reactionary tendencies in biology were defeated and where the creative biological science of Michurin and Lysenko that serves the interests of the Soviet people completely carried the day, testifies to this. This is also proved by the decisions of our party on ideological questions, by the struggle which the party is conducting against reactionary, anti-popular influences in the sphere of ideology, against bourgeois aesthetics, formalism, orphan cosmopolitanism and servility before the corrupt bourgeois culture of the West. The Soviet people welcomed these decisions of the party with great enthusiasm. The Soviet people stigmatize the cosmopolitans in the sphere of art and science, who attempt to underrate the importance of Russian and especially Soviet culture. The Soviet people love their socialist fatherland deeply. For them the glorious, progressive traditions of the great Russian people and the other peoples of the USSR, traditions that have embodied and have attained further development in the Soviet socialist culture, are very dear. By directing the development of Soviet culture, which national in form and socialist in content, the Soviet state educates the workers of the USSR in the spirit of lofty patriotism, in Soviet national pride, in the spirit of devotion to the interests of the party of Lenin and Stalin, to the interests of the socialist fatherland, the Soviet socialist state. The inexhaustible source of the might of the Soviet state as well as the whole Soviet society lies in the indissoluble ties of the Soviet people and the Soviet socialist state. To Lenin and Stalin, the great leaders of the proletariat, furthered an all-round development of Marxism, deepened and concretized Marx's teachings on the socialist state and on the dictatorship of the proletariat. Right up to Lenin's time, Marxists of all countries were convinced that the parliamentary democratic republic is the most expedient form of the political organization of society in the period of transition from capitalism to socialism. Basing himself on the new experience of the international working class movement and in the first place, on the experience of the Russian revolutions, Lenin arrived at the conclusion that it was the Republic of Soviets and not a parliamentary republic which constitutes the best form of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Lenin studied most attentively the experience and the nature of Soviet organizations as mass revolutionary organizations of the people. Already in 1905, at the time of the bourgeois democratic revolution, Lenin pointed out that the Soviets represented not only a weapon of the revolutionary struggle of the masses and organs of universal, popular armed uprising but also the embryo of the new revolutionary power. In 1917, during the period of the transition of the bourgeois democratic revolution into the socialist revolution, when there arose the question of the transfer of power from the hands of the bourgeoisie to the hands of the proletariat, Lenin strongly emphasized the fact that the Soviets constitute not only the most powerful organs of mass, political actions of the workers, of the revolutionary struggle of the masses, the organs of armed insurrection, organs capable of breaking the omnipotence of finance capital and its political organization, but also a new type of state power, adapted to the needs of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Let them feel ashamed who say, we have no machinery to replace the old one which inevitably gravitates towards the defense of the bourgeoisie. Because there is such a machinery. That is the Soviets. Do not be afraid of the initiative and independence of the masses, trust the revolutionary organization of the masses, thus said Lenin. He thus demonstrated in a thorough fashion the special feature and the advantages of Soviet organization. The strength of the Soviet organization lies in that it alone was born out of the creative activity of the revolutionary people and became the political foundation of the revolutionary power of the workers and peasants. It was, therefore, capable of immediately and effectively smashing and finally, destroying, the old, i.e., the bourgeois bureaucratic and judicial apparatus, and of releasing the army from subordination to bourgeois command and of converting it from an instrument of oppression of the people by the exploiters into an instrument of liberating the people from the yoke of the bourgeoisie. The strength of the Soviet organization lies, as Lenin points out, in the fact that being the all-embracing organization of the proletariat, the only organization embracing all the workers, it guarantees the close cooperation of the working class and the peasantry, the alliance of the working class with the peasantry and the leading role of the working class in this alliance. Finally, Lenin teaches us that the strength of the Soviet organization consists in the fact that the Soviets are the direct organization of the toiling and exploited masses themselves, which helps them to organize and administer the state themselves in every possible way. And in this it is the vanguard of the toiling and exploited, the urban proletariat, that enjoys the advantage in that it is best organized by the large enterprises. It is much easier for it to elect and watch elections. The Soviet organization automatically helps to unite all the toilers and exploited round their vanguard, the proletariat. And it is precisely because of this that the Soviets are the most democratic organization which draw in the masses of workers in the administration of the state, and bring into play their creative initiative, catch up their initiative and zero-organize them in the struggle for the ultimate triumph at zero-munism. The strength of the Soviet state lies in that it springs right from among the masses themselves and bases itself on their support and their participation in administration. Lenin, in drawing the distinction between bourgeois democracy and proletarian democracy, pointed out that as opposed to the false, restricted and formal democracy under capitalism, a democracy for the rich and for their servitors, proletarian democracy is a democracy for the overwhelming majority of the population, a democracy of the workers, peasants and intelligentsia. The principal conditions, guaranteeing the establishment of a proletarian democracy, are the expropriation of the principal means of production from the exploiters, the destruction of the old official, bureaucratic apparatus of state power which was designed for the suppression of the workers, the drawing in of the broadest masses of workers in the administration not in state. Lenin teaches us that it is this which in fact constitutes the basis of real democracy for the people. Without the transfer of power from the hands of the bourgeoisie into the hands of the proletariat and the confiscation of the land from the landowners and the big industries and banks from the capitalists, without the transfer of the best printing establishments, buildings, theaters, schools, cinema, radio, etc., into the hands of the workers, all talk about democracy for the people is empty chatter calculated to fool the workers and peasants. The world historical significance of the October Socialist Revolution consists in that for the first time in history it smashed the old state machinery, established Soviet power, transferred the principal means of production to the workers' state. Now, for the first time in history, the benefits of democracy were accessible in reality to the workers and began to be used by the workers, by the toiling peasantry and the intelligentsia in their own interests and against the interests of the exploiters. All supporters of real democracy who desire to see it in action and not in words must take to this path. This will mean substituting the dictatorship of one class for popular, pure, democracy. Howled the Skiedmans and Kortskys, the Orstiltzes and Renners, and today Bevin and Attlee, Blum and Schumacher, Green and Renatowl in the same manner. Lenin replied that it was not true. It will be the substitution of democracy for the poor for democracy to the rich. It will be the substitution of the right of assembly and freedom of the press for the majority of the population, the toilers, the right of assembly and freedom of the press for the minority, the exploiters. It will be the enormous world historical expansion of democracy, its transformation from lies into truth, the emancipation of mankind from the fetters of capital, which distorts and curtails all bourgeois democracy, even the most democratic and republican. The Soviet proletarian state which replaced the bourgeois state completely accomplished at one stroke equality of citizens, irrespective of sex, religion, nationality, an equality that bourgeois democracy has always promised everywhere and which it has never been able to introduce in any place. In contradistinction to the bourgeois state which keeps the masses away from participation in the work of administration, the Soviet state enlists the masses, the exploited masses, in the work of administration. By its structure the Soviet power is adapted to bringing near the masses to the machinery of administration. All this proves that proletarian democracy is 1,000,000 times more democratic than any bourgeois democracy. Soviet power is 1,000,000 times more democratic than the most democratic bourgeois republic. In 1917, when the workers and peasants of the Russian Empire overthrew the power of the landowners and the capitalists, the bourgeoisie of all countries screamed that the workers and peasants had acted undemocratically. However, life proved the contrary. In the USSR, in a very short space of time, there arose a powerful socialist industry and a progressive socialist agriculture. The exploiting classes were eliminated and within the land the moral and political unity of Soviet society was attained. The national differences that existed between the peoples of the Russian Empire under Tsarism became a thing of the past, and the friendship of the peoples of the Soviet Union, a friendship based on real equality, trust and the voluntary cooperation of the peoples of the USSR was achieved and consolidated. As opposed to bourgeois democracy, Soviet democracy in the period of transition from capitalism to socialism was a real democracy for the people, who had been freed from exploitation, and who received actual rights in place of formal rights. This Soviet democracy displayed all its advantages with even greater force in the period of victorious socialism. The Victory F socialism in the USSR, the elimination of the exploiting classes, the important changes which took place in the working class, peasantry and intelligentsia, and which brought about the moral and political unity of the Soviet state, and lastly, the greater strengthening of the friendship of the peoples of the USSR, all this necessitated the introduction of a new constitution built on principles of developed socialist democracy. Soviet democracy does not know of the restrictions, characteristic of bourgeois constitutions. It does not know of any qualifications of residence and education, of racial and national discrimination, of the restriction of rights of women and youth, of property qualifications, etc. Soviet socialist democracy does not merely proclaim the equality of rights of citizens, but ensures it by giving legislative embodiment to the fact that the regime of exploitation has been abolished, to the fact that the citizens have been emancipated from all exploitation. In the USSR, democratic liberties were not merely proclaimed, they were guaranteed by providing definite material resources. The workers of the USSR enjoy rights that they could not even dream of under the system of bourgeois democracy: the right to work and rest, security in case of illness and old age, right to education, and the victory of socialism guaranteed the utilization of these rights by the workers. For the first time in history, the system of developed socialist democracy was an example of genuine democracy, based on a wide drawing in of the masses in the work of administration of the socialist state, as opposed to bourgeois democracy, which was based on force and acted as a screen to hide the domination of the exploited by the exploiters. The function of military suppression inside the country was rendered unnecessary by the elimination of exploiters in the USSR. In the period of victorious socialism, the main task of the Soviet socialist state inside the country was work of peaceful economic organization and cultural education. Indeed, Present-day bourgeois democracy, with its worn-out fragment of much-advertised freedom, with its crude and cynical use of violence against the oppressed classes, with its regime of exploitation and hunger for the workers, seems pitiable and deformed in comparison with socialist democracy. The whole course of world history has confirmed the profundity and the correctness of the Leninist postulate that the era of bourgeois democratic parliamentarism has come to an end, and a new chapter in world history, the era of proletarian dictatorship, has commenced, the era of the triumph of socialist democracy. Lenin more than once pointed out that the Soviet power is the amalgamation of local Soviets into one single state organization built on the principle of democratic centralism. Soviet power combines a consistently realizable centralism with the exuberant democraticism of the popular mass, who, for the first time, have taken their destiny in their own hands. The popular masses participate in the work of administration of the country through the system of Soviets and other mass organizations of the workers. They control the activities of the Soviet organs and recall and replace the deputies who fail to justify the trust of the people. The establishment of Soviet power meant the amalgamation of the local Soviets into a common state organization of the proletariat as the ruling class and the vanguard of all the workers and of the exploited masses, the creation of the Republic of Soviets. The essence of the Soviet power is contained in the fact that these organizations have a most pronounced mass character. These most revolutionary organizations of precisely those classes that were oppressed by the capitalists and landlords are now the permanent and sole basis of the whole state apparatus, that precisely those masses which even in the most democratic bourgeois republics, while being equal in law, have in fact been prevented by thousands of tricks and devices from taking part in political life and from enjoying democratic rights and liberties, are now drawn unfailingly into constant and, moreover, decisive participation in the democratic administration of the state. In his work, On the Foundations of Leninism, Comrade Stalin generalizes and develops the Leninist characterizations of Soviet power. He lays down the following as its distinctive and characteristic features. The Soviet power has a most pronounced mass character and is the most democratic state organization of all possible state organizations while classes continue to exist. It is the arena of the bond between the working class and the peasantry directed against the exploiters, and basing itself on this union, the Soviet power is the power of the majority of the population over the minority. It is the state of the majority, the expression of its dictatorship. The Soviet power is the most internationalist of state organizations in class society, capable of completely destroying national oppression and of organizing close cooperation of the workers of different nationalities and of educating them in the spirit of trust, mutual respect and friendship, in the spirit of socialist internationalism and Soviet patriotism. By virtue of this it facilitates the association of the workers' various nationalities into a single state union. Even long before the Great October Revolution, Comrade Stalin had elaborated the program of our party on the national question. He laid down the basis for a solution of the national question during the period of Soviet power as well as a solution to the question of the paths to be followed for development of the culture of the national republics. In respect of this, Comrade Stalin emphasized the leading role of the Russian people in rallying the peoples of the Soviet Union and in the struggle for communism. From the very first days of the Soviet power, the entire work of building national republics and national culture of all the peoples of the USSR proceeded under the direct guidance of Comrade Stalin. The great flowering of the economy and culture of the peoples of our country is closely associated with the name of Stalin. In emphasizing the services of Comrade Stalin in the work of building the multinational Soviet state, V.M. Molotov says, more than anyone else, Comrade Stalin contributed to the creation of a firm politically united Soviet Union out of the insufficiently united Soviet republics and to the drawing up of its first constitution. With this was laid the foundation of the mighty Soviet state, based on the great friendship of the Soviet peoples. The Declaration of Rights to the Toiling and Exploited People, which was published in Pravda on January 17, 1918, was signed by V.I. Lenin and drafted by him with Stalin's assistance. It declared that the Soviet Republic be constituted on the principle of a free union of free nations. It was on these principles that Lenin and Stalin founded the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and the first Constitution of the USSR. In his report delivered at the extraordinary 8th Congress of Soviets of the USSR, Comrade Stalin spoke of the specific features of the new constitution of the USSR, which was the legislative embodiment of the victory of the Great October Socialist Revolution. He emphasized the fact that unlike bourgeois constitutions which at bottom are nationalistic, since they proceed from the premise that nations and races cannot have equal rights, the draft of the new constitution was on the contrary, profoundly internationalistic, since it proceeded from the proposition that all nations and races, irrespective of their past and present position, irrespective of their strengths and weakness, should enjoy equal rights, in all spheres of the economic, social, political and cultural life of society. As a result of a consistent Leninist-Stalinist national policy, the Soviet Union was transformed into a mighty multinational socialist state in a free union of free nations. The absence of exploiting classes, which are the principal organizers of strife between nations, the absence of exploitation which cultivates mutual distrust and kindles nationalist passions, the fact that power is in the hands of the working class which is the foe of all enslavement and the true vehicle of the ideas of internationalism, the actual practice of mutual aid among the peoples in all spheres of economic and social life, and, finally, the flourishing national culture of the peoples of the USSR, culture which is national in form and socialist in content. All these and similar factors have brought about a radical change in the aspect of the peoples of the USSR. Their feeling of mutual distrust has disappeared, a feeling of mutual friendship has developed among them, and thus real fraternal cooperation among the peoples has been established within the system, a single federated state. The Soviet power is defending the interests of all the workers. The Soviet power by its very structure facilitates the task of leading the peasantry and other strata of the toilers to the side of the working class, as the most consolidated and most class-conscious core of the Soviets. The Soviet power does away with the division of the legislative and executive functions which exist in bourgeois parliamentary republics. It combines the legislative and executive functions in a single state organization, directly links the workers and the laboring masses in general with the apparatus of state administration, teaches them how to administer the country. The Soviet power saved the army from its subordination to bourgeois command and converted it from the instrument of oppression of the people which it was under capitalism into an instrument for the liberation of the people from the yoke of the bourgeoisie, both native and foreign. Stalin. Ibid. p. 48, and it organized and strengthened the armed forces of revolution. The Soviet state's organization finally destroyed the old bureaucratic and judicial apparatus, created the necessary conditions for doing away with bureaucratic distortion and red tape in state's organs. The Soviet form of state draws in all the mass organizations of the toilers, the trade unions, Komsomol, cooperatives, press, workers' societies and consequently all their members into constant and positive participation in the state administration. It, at the same time, prepares one of the most important conditions for the future withering away of the state in a world communist society. Comrade Stalin concludes, the Republic of Soviets is thus the political form, so long sought and finally discovered, within the framework of which the emancipation of the proletariat, the complete victory of socialism is to be accomplished. The Paris Commune was the embryo of this form, the Soviet power is its development and culmination. Lenin and Stalin teach us that the dictatorship of the proletariat is the main content of the proletarian revolution, the main weapon in the hands of the working class, which it utilizes to crush the exploiters, to liquidate classes and build socialism. The Soviet power is the highest form of the dictatorship of the proletariat, of the working class, best adapted for carrying out the functions of the socialist state, not only during the transitional period from capitalism to socialism but also under socialism. All this testifies alike to the world historical significance of the Leninist teaching on the Soviet type of state, on the Soviets as a state form of the socialist state, and to the world historical significance of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, created under the guidance of Lenin and Stalin and growing into a powerful force under the leadership of the great Stalin. 3. The consolidation of the regime of people's democracy in the countries of Eastern and Central Europe is one of the greatest examples of the vitality and the correctness of Marxist-Leninist teaching on the state. All these countries had been occupied by Hitlerite Germany on the eve of or during the course of the war. Almost all of them had till the time of occupation lived through a long period of fascist and therefore the most savage form of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. In the period of fascist rule, the overwhelming section of the landlords and big bourgeoisie of these countries exercised a brutal dictatorship within the country, and their foreign policy was oriented towards supporting the imperialists of USA, England, France, Italy and above all Germany. These governments were not merely organs of oppression of the peoples of these countries but also advance posts of imperialism in its struggle against the Soviet Union. During the Second World War, the human resources and especially the industrial resources and raw materials of these countries were utilized to a great extent by Hitlerite Germany in its struggle against the Soviet Union. The struggle of the workers, the peasants, the intelligentsia and of considerable strata of the petty and the middle bourgeoisie against the fascist dictatorship, against the fascist governments of their countries was at the same time, a struggle for national liberation from the yoke of fascist Germany, a liberation struggle against the Hitlerite imperialist bandits. The anti-fascist liberation struggle of the peoples of these countries derived its inspiration and support from the patriotic liberation struggle waged by the Soviet people against Hitlerite imperialism. The anti-fascist liberation struggle waged by the peoples of Central and Eastern Europe against the Hitlerite regime merged with the struggle for socialism, waged by the peoples of the Soviet Union. Under these conditions the defeat of imperialist Germany and the collapse of the Hitlerite regime led to the defeat and the collapse of the fascist regimes in the countries that were the satellites of Hitlerite Germany. At the last moment, various groups of landlords and the bourgeoisie in order to rescue their dictatorship reorientated themselves towards Anglo-American imperialism and attempted to convert these countries into an instrument of Anglo-Saxon imperialism, directed against the USSR. But the peoples of the countries of Eastern and Central Europe who had gone through the stern school of the fight against fascism under the leadership of the communist parties, who had been liberated from Hitlerite tyranny by the Soviet army, defeated the insidious plans of the ill-starred agents of German and Anglo-American imperialism by assuming power in their own hands. The national liberation and the anti-fascist struggle was objectively an anti-imperialist struggle which the people of Eastern and Central Europe together waged under the leadership of the great Soviet Union, based upon the mighty strength of the Soviet army, an army of liberators. Out of this great national liberation and anti-fascist struggle, there arose a new people's power, resting on the broad democratic bloc of diverse social forces, the workers, peasants, the urban petty bourgeoisie, the intelligentsia. The basis of this bloc, the alliance of the working class and the peasantry, brought about under the leadership of the working class the transfer of power from the hands of the landlords of the capitalists into the hands of the people, the defeat of the counter-revolutionary parties, the nationalization of industry and the introduction of land reforms represented a revolutionary act of the greatest historical significance. These changes are equivalent to socialist revolution. The new power could not but suppress all the attempts of the counter-revolutionary conspirators who were inspired from Britain and USA, to re-establish the rule of the landlords and capitalists, and to restore the fascist order. The new power could only be a dictatorship directed against the enemies of the